Did you ever hear about the time when humans declared war on birds? No, not the Hitchcock movie, but the real deal. Picture it, Western Australia, 1932. The world was in the grip of the Great Depression, but down under, an entirely different problem was unfolding. A problem of feathery proportions. Enter the emus. Not your typical enemy, but an enemy nonetheless. These flightless birds, native to Australia, were causing quite a commotion. You see, around 20,000 emus had migrated inland, fleeing their usual habitat in search of water and food. Their destination? The Western Australian farming lands. The emus, in their quest for sustenance, began to wreak havoc on the local farming communities. Crops were being destroyed and the livelihoods of the farmers were under threat. And these weren't your average birds. Standing up to 6 feet tall with a hearty appetite and a surprising turn of speed, the emus were not an adversary to be taken lightly. The farmers, beleaguered and desperate, turned to the government for help, and the government in turn turned to the military. Yes, you heard it right. The Australian military was about to go to war with emus. The Minister of Defence, Sir George Pearce, decided that the situation called for drastic measures. He believed that the Australian military, armed with machine guns, could easily solve the emu problem. It was a decision that was to lead to one of the most bizarre chapters in Australian history. The stage was set. On one side, the Australian military, armed to the teeth and ready for action. On the other, an army of hungry emus, blissfully unaware of the impending conflict. It was to be a battle unlike any other, a showdown between man and bird. And so, with crops under siege and farmers at their wits' end, the Australian military was called in to save the day, or so they thought. Little did they know the emus were not going down without a fight. But that, dear listeners, is a tale for the next scene. Imagine this, soldiers armed with machine guns facing off against emus. Yes, you heard that right. In the heartland of Western Australia, 1932, military strategists hatched their initial plans to combat these feathered foes. They envisioned a swift and decisive victory, underestimating the resourcefulness of their unlikely enemy. Their strategy was straightforward: use the firepower of machine guns to control the emu population. But what they didn't account for was the uncanny agility and resilience of these birds. The first engagement took place in late October. Soldiers armed with Lewis guns waited as a mob of 50 emus approached their position, but as they opened fire, the birds scattered in all directions, their long legs carrying them swiftly across the arid landscape. The soldiers were left in disbelief as their targets disappeared into the distance, largely unscathed. The military's initial foray into the emu war was, in short, a fiasco. The birds proved to be not only swift and elusive, but also surprisingly tough. Despite being in the line of fire, many emus simply shrugged off the impacts and continued their rampage across the farmland. The soldiers were baffled. They had underestimated their adversaries, attributing to them the characteristics of conventional enemy forces. But these emus were guerrilla fighters, unpredictable and unrelenting. The emus' agility wasn't the only challenge the military faced. The vast, open terrain of Western Australia provided the birds with ample escape routes, while the limited mobility of the machine guns made it difficult for the soldiers to keep up. In the face of these unexpected challenges, the military had to rethink their strategy, but the damage had been done. The first round had ended, and it was the emus, not the soldiers, who emerged victorious. The emus, it seemed, were not going down without a fight. Round one to the birds. You wouldn't think emus would be so hard to catch, would you? But these birds were no sitting ducks. Picture this. Hardened soldiers, schooled in the arts of warfare, armed with state-of-the-art machine guns and their nemesis, a flock of flightless birds. It's almost like a scene from a Monty Python sketch, isn't it? As the military continued their efforts to curb the emu population, the emu resistance, as it was jokingly referred to, began to take shape. These birds were not just flightless, they were fleet-footed, agile, and surprisingly cunning. They adapted to the soldiers' tactics, often splitting into smaller groups and scattering in different directions, making it difficult for the soldiers to target them. The soldiers, despite their training and firepower, found themselves constantly outfoxed by the emus. It was like chasing shadows. The birds would disappear into the vast open plains of Western Australia, only to reappear at a different location, continuing their quest for food and water and causing more damage to the farmlands. The military strategies were being tested by these feathered foes. Attempts to herd them into confined areas for a concentrated attack proved futile. The emus were always one step ahead, their unpredictable movements throwing the soldiers off their game. In one comical instance, an ambush was set up near a local dam. The soldiers lay in wait, expecting a large group of emus, but only a few showed up. The soldiers opened fire, but the emus scattered and disappeared, leaving the soldiers firing at thin air. This series of events were not just humorous, but also highlighted the unpredictability of human-wildlife conflicts. The soldiers were dealing with a foe unlike any they were trained to handle. Their usual tactics and strategies were of little use against these avian adversaries. The Great Emu War was turning out to be a farce, a comedy of errors where the protagonists were being outwitted by a group of birds. The Australian military, tasked with bringing down the emu population, found themselves in a situation they had not anticipated. Despite their best efforts, the military was being outmaneuvered by emus. Yes, you're still hearing that right. So how does a war against birds end, you might ask? Well, let's delve into the conclusion of this audacious chapter in Australian history, the Great Emu War. After weeks of battling the feathered foes, the Australian military began to realise that their mission was anything but successful. The emus, with their swift movements and unpredictable patterns, managed to evade capture and, quite humorously, outwit the soldiers. In the face of such unprecedented resistance, the military finally decided to withdraw, leaving the fields of Western Australia to its rightful inhabitants, the emus. Despite the government's initial hopes of clearing the vast farmlands of these flightless birds, the emu population persisted. Their numbers continued to swell, much to the amusement and, quite frankly, the bewilderment of the Australian public. The emus, in their own unique way, had triumphed over the machine guns and the military strategies. The public reaction to this bizarre event was mixed. Some found the whole affair comically absurd, while others criticized the government's decision to wage a war on wildlife. The media coverage, however, was nothing short of sensational. Newspapers across the country and even internationally covered the Great Emu War with a mix of amusement and disbelief. Headlines such as "Emus defeat army" and "Feathered foes foil forces" became the talk of the town, adding a layer of humor to the otherwise serious business of news. In the end, the Great Emu War served as a stark reminder of the unpredictability of nature. It highlighted the fact that even the most well-laid plans can go awry when dealing with wildlife. It was a lesson in humility, a lesson that sometimes it's better to coexist than to combat. And so, the emus of Western Australia won the war, proving that sometimes feathers really are mightier than the sword. And what's the moral of this feathered fable? Never underestimate an emu. In the years following the so-called Great Emu War, this curious episode has taken on a life of its own. It has slipped into the annals of history, not as a tale of conquest or heroism, but as a quirky, almost comedic footnote that never fails to elicit a chuckle. Despite the military's best efforts, the emus of Western Australia proved to be more than a match for their human adversaries. Their agility, speed, and sheer numbers allowed them to evade capture and continue their destructive path across the wheat fields. The soldiers, armed with machine guns and a mission, found themselves outmaneuvered by a flock of flightless birds. The legacy of the Great Emu War is one of ironic humor and a poignant reminder of the unpredictability of human-wildlife conflicts. It serves as a testament to the resilience of nature and the folly of underestimating our feathered friends. This unusual conflict has been immortalized in various forms of media, from books and documentaries to memes and social media posts. It's been referenced in popular culture with mentions in television shows, movies, and even video games. But beyond the laughs and the light-hearted jests, the Great Emu War offers a crucial lesson. It underscores the importance of understanding and respecting the natural world. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, and that sometimes those consequences come in the form of a flock of indomitable emus. The Great Emu War is a testament to the unpredictability of nature and the resilience of wildlife. It serves as a reminder that even the best-laid plans can go awry when dealing with the natural world. So as we remember the Great Emu War, let's not forget the lessons it has taught us. Let's remember to respect nature, to understand its unpredictability, and to never ever underestimate an emu. So the next time you see an emu, remember, these birds have a history of outsmarting humans. You've been warned.